Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is October 2nd, 2018, and we are very excited to be broadcasting live to you today. For those of you on Facebook Live from Salt Lake City, Utah, in the Mormon Stories studios. Today we have a really sobering story, and so I think I want to begin just with some trigger warnings. Today we're going to be talking about sexual abuse with kind of an overriding theme of how the Mormon Church in 2018 continues to cover up and protect their abusers at the expense of the abused. So that's the theme. We plan to do a multi-interview series on this topic, just like we did kind of the Losing the Lamanites series and the Inappropriate Bishop interview series. So if any of you are interested and willing to come on Mormon Stories on video and tell your stories about how you were the victim of abuse and the church covered it up and protected the abuser at your expense, our intent is not to embarrass or shame the church, or even less to embarrass or shame perpetrators. It's to help fix a system that systematically is again harming abuse victims by focusing on sort of its own legal concerns, its own reputation concerns, and its own leadership at the expense of the abused. So thank you for joining us. Today we have in studio Jared and Juli Egley. They live in Idaho, is that right? Yes. And the story is kind of harrowing because it involves Jared's uncle. Jared will be telling us a story about how he was abused as a 6 or 7 year old by his uncle when the uncle was around 17, 18. And lately, within how many years ago?
He's been a bishop for 3 years.
About 3 years ago, his brother, his uncle, was called as a bishop. To Jared's knowledge, having never confessed the sexual abuse or received any punishment for it, Jared and Juli kind of did a lot of due diligence to let the bishop, the stake president, and even a Mormon general authority know about the abuse so that this could be handled quietly and let's just say diplomatically. And it appears as though this was completely bungled by the church. And so the only reason they're coming out now is because they feel like the way the church has handled this is unacceptable. And so because the way they handle it is so unacceptable, they want the church to handle these things more appropriately. Is that true?
Correct.
So that's kind of the teaser or the abstract of what story we're about to hear today. It's somber stuff. It's sobering stuff. Trigger warnings. Please practice self-care. Please know that we're going to be talking about some heavy things, even some graphic things. And so if you need to turn it off or monitor who's in the room, practice self-care, take it in increments, whatever it is you need to do to practice self-care. Please know ahead of time that we're going to be talking about heavy stuff. So without any further ado, Jared and Juli Egley, thank you so much for coming to our studios. Thanks for joining us on Mormon Stories.
Thanks for having us, John. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So is there any disclaimer or intro you want to sort of add to supplement what I just said before we dive into your stories?
No, none that I can think of.
No?
No,
Okay.
we're good.
Okay, so before we talk at all about the abuse, let's just establish a little bit about your backgrounds as Mormons, so that we can then just sort of know from what background and point of view you guys are telling the story now. Is that okay?
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay. So Jared, let's start with you. We won't do a long treatment of your background.
Sure.
But just give us kind of the bullet points of your history and background of the church and what the church has meant to you prior to deciding that you wanted to speak openly about these issues.
Sure. I was born and raised LDS, fifth generation. My ancestors came from Switzerland, and we currently live on the farm that my great-great-grandfather homesteaded in the 1880s.
What was his last name?
Egley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So same last name, came from Switzerland. Every generation of the Egley family has been active LDS members.
Where's that farm exactly?
It's in southeast Idaho, just north of Preston.
Okay.
Idaho. Yeah.
So around Preston, Franklin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Preston is the closest city.
Okay.
where
What
we
high school is in that area?
Preston High.
Okay.
Home of Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah. So did you know Jared Hess at all?
I did.
You knew him?
Yeah. In fact, we were in Young Men's together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jared's a friend of mine.
Yep.
I'll make sure he knows.
We were in the Riverdale ward
Okay.
together.
Okay.
Yep.
So you know Jared and his brothers.
I haven't talked to him since I was in Young Men's, so I don't know him that well. But we were in the same ward at one point.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So that's so great grandfather. Is that what you said?
Great grandfather.
Any idea if he was a polygamist?
He was not.
Okay.
So
That's interesting.
there is some family history there that we question whether he was or not. But no, none of the Egleys were polygamists.
That you're aware of.
There was some divorce and some marrying of some neighbors and stuff like that doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah,
Okay.
not polygamists to my knowledge.
That you're aware of. Okay.
Yeah.
So anything you want to say about your background before you talk about you, like your ancestors or anything like that?
No, I'm good with that.
Okay.
We're
Just farmers.
farmers from Switzerland that came over, and I'm the first generation that's not been a full-time farmer.
And what farming was it? What type of farming? Was it milk? Was it dairy?
No.
Was it potatoes?
Beef cattle and crops. Right now we run a large alfalfa farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So your upbringing in the church, just at a high level?
We were active members of the church. I always remember going to church. That was what we did. I don't know that we regularly had family home evening and scripture study, but we were always active in the church as long as I can remember. Our family became a lot more active when I was in middle school and high school years, and my dad was called into a bishopric about the time I left on my mission, and has been either in a bishopric or a bishop or a high counselor for the last 25 years. So we have a very active family. And I was always very active, served a mission when I was 19, went to Montana all the way from Idaho. Yeah. Came back, went to BYU, got married in the Salt Lake Temple, and we've been active tithe-paying members until April, this last April.
So how many years is that?
Would have been 40, well, I was 40, turned 42 in April, so.
So how many of those 42 years would you have considered yourself an Orthodox believing Mormon?
I'm going to say 39 or 40.
So almost 4 decades as an
Correct.
Orthodox
Correct.
believing active Mormon.
Correct.
And how would you generally characterize your experiences in the church and relationships in the church?
Good.
Not talking about the abuse or the way it was handled,
Good.
but just
I loved the church. I mean, every decision that I made was based upon principles that the church taught. And I loved the church. I believed it, and it brought meaning to my life. It brought answers to my life, and I had no reason to not believe what I was taught. I had questions like everybody else. I have stuff from my mission about anachronisms in the Book of Mormon and historicity and stuff like that, but none of that stuff ever caused me to question my faith or trust in the church.
you shelved that stuff.
Yeah.
How about church service? Did you serve in callings throughout
Yeah.
those 4 decades?
Yeah.
Just after your mission?
Yeah, I've served in elders' quorum presidencies for a number of years. I'm still currently in the young men's presidency in our ward.
Whoa.
You can ask my bishop why I've not been released. I've asked to be released, but I'm still
So you're currently
in.
you have a
young
calling. You
I
currently
have
have a calling in your ward.
I have a calling.
Okay.
I'm the young men's secretary currently.
Okay.
I haven't been to church since April, but I'm still there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But for 40 years you were active and
Yeah.
believing.
Served, never said no to a calling.
Okay.
Yeah. All in.
Okay. And how many? I guess we'll talk to Juli in a second. But married in the temple.
Sure.
How many kids? Do you have kids?
4.
4 kids.
4 kids.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to say about your Mormon upbringing?
No, just that we were absolutely active members of the church, and it meant the world to us.
Okay. Julie?
I do have polygamy in my background. My one of the greats was John Pack.
Wait, just 1 second. Jared, are you feeling something right now? I'm just sensing you might be feeling a little emotional, but you all right?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
good.
Okay. All right, Julie.
Yeah. So, I have polygamy. I'm 6th generation. All my parents both sets 6 generations back. My parents both I have John Pack was an ancestor, and he had, I think, 5 wives. Mm-hmm. He was his name's on the monument. He was with Brigham Young's party when they came to Salt Lake. So my parents were both raised very active. Their parents were both temple workers, lots of family history. I one day traced a family history line all the way back to Adam. I haven't since found it, but
Yeah, I remember.
just
I
kept
remember when we
clicking
do
and
that. Yeah.
there he was.
Yeah.
So my parents were both very active members. They both got married young. My early years in the church, my mom was the perfect Mormon mother. She was the bishop's daughter. We did everything right. We had family home evening. My dad worked away from home a lot. That stressed their marriage. They ended up...
What city was this in again?
I grew up in Colville, Utah.
Okay.
Little tiny town outside of Park City, Morgan area.
Okay.
My dad ended up cheating on my mom. My mom went to her bishop for counsel and was told she had a greater sin because she couldn't forgive my dad. That kind of strained her relationship to the church. So my parents ended up getting divorced. We still went to church, but we weren't forced to go to church. My mom and dad tried to make it work for us the best they could. We stayed in the same house, and they would take turns because my dad worked away from home. When he was home, he would be with us. When he was gone, my mom would come back. So I was kind of unsupervised as a teenager at times, but I still was a good kid. I went to girls' camp, graduated from seminary. Didn't go every Sunday, but I still believed, was still on the Mormon path. Wasn't perfect by any means. Graduated high school, went to college. There I met Jared, so yeah.
Which college?
I went to the good school in Provo, UVSC at the time, UVU.
The Wolverines.
Yes.
The one that people that can't get into BYU go to.
I didn't even apply to BYU.
Oh,
so.
no digs. No digs on Mormon stories.
No. Yeah, we were in Provo, Happy Valley. So we met. Do you want to know the story of how we met? Does that matter? We met, dated for about a year, got married in the temple. I graduated from nursing school about 6 months after we got married. Then we moved to Vegas. Then we moved to Preston. Then we moved to Houston for Jared's career. We lived in the Woodlands, Texas for about 6.5 years. Jared worked at Continental Express. We had 3 kids. Lived the dream. We were both in presidencies.
So you served in callings?
Yeah. I think I was the secretary of every organization. Jared was in Elders Quorum because he had a truck and could help people move. So.
Were you faithful when you got married? Did you believe?
Yes.
What was your vision of your marriage and your family church-wise?
So my mom actually was disfellowshipped from the church, and we chose to get married in the temple. She was not at our wedding, which was a very hard thing for me. Now, at the time, I feel really bad because I felt like if she wanted to be there, she would have been there. But she had she's amazing. She had the integrity that she wouldn't lie just to be there. She was just outside and felt like she was part of it and supportive completely. But yeah, I basically chose the church over my family. So I was all in. It's what you do. It's where you go.
What about your dad? Was he at your wedding?
He was there. Yeah, he was there. So, yeah, you choose the Mormon path and you be the Mormon mom and the Mormon wife and serve and love. And I mean, I was a missionary to all, I made non-member friends out in the mission field and, tried to convert them and just lived the dream. We had perfect life. Jared got a job with Delta. We moved back to what we felt was Zion, I guess, and moved back to Idaho. Had another child, so we have 4 kids now. We lived in Preston for about 5 years, and then we moved up to the farm where Jared's dad farms and kind of helped do that. That brought us up to current day.
Okay, so as far as your faith goes, prior to this sort of stuff, where was your testimony? Where was your faith? How did you feel about the church?
I knew it. I believed it. I actually got called to be primary president the same time. I served in primary in our ward in Mink Creek, and since the time we moved up there, and then I got called to be primary president about the same time Jared told me about the abuse, and then that's where it got tricky. But up to that point, we went to church every Sunday. We weren't great at having family home evening. We spent a lot of time together as a family, but Jared's schedule is not your typical 9 to 5. So when he was home, we would do family events. It wasn't always on Monday. But we taught the kids the gospel. We believed. We had family prayer. We weren't the best at reading scriptures because I'm not a morning person, but we were all in.
And Jared, you're a pilot for, do you want to say who or do you not want to say who? You're a commercial airline pilot.
I'm a commercial airline pilot. Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you do international flights, so you fly.
Yeah, I mostly do domestic flights by choice.
But you have flown internationally. Big jets.
Correct.
All right. Okay, and have you worked at all outside the home?
Yes, I actually was a nurse, a registered nurse, and I worked in labor and delivery. And that's when we were in Texas. I would work when he was home. He would take care of the kids while I worked, and we worked our schedules around each other. Then when we moved back, we had our 4th child. I continued to work for about 1.5 years, and then it got to the point where it was easier for him to go to work, and I just worked part-time. So then I got to stay home.
All right. Well, so I guess to summarize, it sounds like for 4 decades, both of you were faithful Orthodox Mormons, committed to the church. And as I understand it, from what background I've heard, there's no motive to hurt the church or to attack the church. No. This all kind of blindsided you in terms of your faith. Is that right? This whole experience?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, if it's okay, let's jump to the story.
Sure.
How do you want to start telling us kind of what happened to you when you were a child?
Well, I guess I could just start when the abuse occurred. Everybody's always asked what your earliest childhood memories are. That's a common question that people ask in group settings. And, my entire life when that question would come up, I remembered abuse that I experienced when I was a child. And that abuse would occur in my grandparents' home when we would go to visit my grandparents. I had an uncle that was 12 years older than I was. And he had some tractors that were toy tractors that, of course, a 6-year-old would love to play with. And I always liked to go to Grandma and Grandpa's and play with those tractors. And he kept those tractors in his room. And I remember that I would go to his room, and in order for me to play with those tractors, I would have to perform oral sex on my uncle. And I vividly remember that. It's something that I've always remembered. And, it's what happened. I don't know why I allowed it to happen, but I remember that happening. And then, I would watch him masturbate into a garbage can, and those are vivid memories. Like, I can remember those as clearly as any of my childhood memories that I have. I've always remembered them. It happened on numerous occasions. I can remember, I think, 3 occasions where that happened that are separate. I don't know if it happened more than that, and I don't remember if it happened over a 1-month period or a 6-month period. Those are details that I don't remember. And then when that abuse was over, he would tell me that if I wanted to play with those tractors again, I wouldn't tell anybody, and that if I did tell anybody that I would be in a lot of trouble because what I had done was wrong. And I knew that what I had done was wrong. I remember the feelings of feeling that that was not something that was right. So as a child, I feared that if I told anybody that I would be in trouble and that I wouldn't get to play with those tractors again, which to a 6-year-old, that's like the most important thing, you know? So I didn't tell anybody. The abuse did eventually stop. Like I said, I don't know how long it occurred. I don't know why it stopped. He did go on a mission, so it would have had to have stopped maybe because he went on his mission. I don't know those details. No adults were ever made aware of the abuse, and he never did tell anybody or take care of that abuse, so he would be the only one that would know those details. I don't know those details. So the abuse stopped, and I continued to live my life. And
let me ask you, and I don't even know if you're able to remember or conceptualize this, but can you talk at all about what that type of abuse does to a child? Or can you even tease that out?
I just remember those details being very vivid. I mean, there are details like I have other childhood memories that you can kind of remember. Like I have a childhood, I threw a rock at a kid in kindergarten, and I thought I was going to get kicked out of school. So instead of going to see the principal, I just walked home, and the whole town was looking for me. And I remember that, but not very clearly. But I remember the abuse vividly. Like it's something that I've never forgotten.
And some would ask, well, was this something that was recovered memory that some therapist kind of led you to remember?
No, I've never talked to a therapist in my life, ever.
Okay.
And I've always remembered those things. Like I said, whenever the conversation comes up in a group setting of what are your earliest childhood memories, those are mine. Mm-hmm. And obviously I didn't tell anybody that those were my memories, but I've always had them as long as I can remember.
And is there anything you can say to how that affects a child or a boy or even a youth, a young male, to sort of have experienced that and then to grow up with those memories, having never told anybody? Is it
Sure?
Is it harmful? Is it?
Oh, it was very harmful because it's something that at least for me, I was so afraid. I remember being afraid as a child that somebody would find out and I would be in trouble. So I wasn't going to tell anybody. There was no way I was going to tell anybody. I do remember having a conversation with it. We've talked about this with my parents because I remember having a conversation in a car. I know that most children never tell adults that they are abused. It usually, if they do find out, it's by accident that a child says something. I do remember a memory in a car asking somebody when I got big, if somebody did the things that I did to my uncle, if I could have the same things happen. And my parents don't remember that, so I don't know if that's a valid memory or not. But I didn't, I never told anybody because I was afraid that I would be in trouble. And then as you get older, I remember as I got older, early teenage years, I didn't want my friends to know what I'd experienced. And I honestly, in my mind, had questioned whether or not I was gay because I had done things that were considered homosexual acts. Did that make me? I wasn't attracted to men, but I had those questions. And it was a concern to me as an early adolescent youth. And, I like other people, and we'll talk about that. I had masturbated as a young teenage kid, and I thought the reason why I did those things was because of the abuse. And I thought that, listening to church leaders that those, only people that are broken do those things, and only people, those are sins and those are bad. And I thought that the reason why I have that flaw in my character is because I was abused. And maybe that's the way I was because of that abuse. But I didn't want anybody to find out because I didn't want to be embarrassed by those things. So Bishop's interviews to me as an early teenager were miserable because I thought that they were, these men that could see through your soul and could use discernment and know everything about you. And I wasn't going to admit to them that I had masturbated because I was certain that they would find out that I had been abused, and I didn't want them. So I dreaded Bishop's interviews, and they were miserable. And I went in there and lied my way through them as an early teenager because I, at all costs, did not want them to know of the abuse that I experienced. So I did everything I could to avoid bishops' interviews. I despised them. I was asked by bishops if I masturbated, and I just lied and said no. They didn't. I never had them dig any deeper than that, but I never admitted that I had done those things for them to dig deeper into those interviews. But I remember them being miserable interviews. One of the things that I think comes into my life is I've always been uncomfortable around priesthood leaders, maybe because of that. So, that's how I kind of lived my life. As I grew older, I realized that I didn't do anything wrong. I wouldn't be in trouble, but I didn't want to confess or let anybody know because I was embarrassed about what had happened. So
So it sounds like some of the harm is you basically, from a very young age, you're feeling like you did something wrong, feeling like you have to keep something secret,
right.
Feeling like if someone found out you could get in trouble, and then
right.
You're carrying that year after year after year.
Right.
And then as you start to mature into into adolescence,
mm-hmm.
the guilt and the shame, and then the association of that with other things that are basically right. normal, it just has you carrying a burden and a sense of guilt and shame for
right.
a decade or decades.
Correct.
Feeling like you can't talk to anybody, and then teaching you to lie because you're scared about what happens if you're honest.
Right.
Then you're sort of like nurtured or corralled into becoming a liar, or someone who lies, not a liar, someone who lies. Then you've got that extra burden.
Well, I always felt that way. I felt like a liar in bishops' interviews because I was.
And that makes you feel just worse about yourself.
But it was better for me to be a liar than to let them know at that point in my life what had happened.
Yeah. So I guess if we're summarizing some of the effects on a child and a youth, it's just carrying a lot of guilt and shame and sadness and secrecy that you shouldn't have to carry.
Right.
Growing up is hard enough.
Right. And
then having it affect how you think of yourself in your own sexual development, mm-hmm. causing a lot of confusion and noise when it's hard enough to just go through puberty without having to carry that baggage.
And as a victim of that, I'm not going to say that only victims understand why victims don't come forward immediately, but I know why I didn't. I have valid reasons for not bringing that up.
What were they? Summarize. Where'd you get in trouble?
Get in trouble and guilt and shame. If my friends as a teenager found out what I had done.
Would they make fun of you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Would they stigmatize you?
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's heavy stuff to have to carry.
Yeah.
Did you just internalize it, or did it come out in unhealthy ways as a teenager?
I internalized it very well.
Okay.
In fact, when I was 15 years old, I broke my back on a motorcycle, and that was a pivotal point in my life where things changed for me because I was given a very small chance to walk again as a 15-year-old kid, and I matured very, very quickly. And I was told by numerous people around me that was a miracle that had happened and that the priesthood had healed me. And because I walked out of a hospital 2 months after I was told I probably wouldn't walk out of a hospital. And I got a patriarchal blessing shortly after that said my life had been preserved for a purpose. And at that point in my life, I changed to be somebody that was more, I doubled down on being good because I felt like God had protected me and I owed him something. And so I doubled down on being good at that point in my life. And I was a good kid from that point on. I didn't do things that were not, I didn't sin much as a kid after that. And I became... Yeah, right, exactly, but I became more faithful and doubled down on being good. And that is how I internalized that was, I'm going to beat this by being better. And so I did that as a teenager. I decided, I finished high school and I turned in my mission papers to go on a mission, I think on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And that weekend I broke my back a second time on a snowmobile. So by the time I was 19 years old, I have broken my back twice. I have 2 sets of metal rods in my back. And at that point, I was being told there's a reason for this, but I was mad because I thought I've done everything in the last 4 years to be good, and now I can't go on a mission like I was going to go, and now I can't go. And so the next few months of that portion of my life was very difficult. I didn't know. I did question whether or not that happened because I had not confessed of some of the things that I'd done prior to age 15 because I didn't want to. And that was always in the back of my mind. But I still never did confess those things. And the doctor that was my doctor at that point in time, she was not a member of the church. She said she would not sign the medical release for me to go on a mission for 3 years because she knew that I would be sleeping on a dirt floor, walking through a jungle, and with my back injuries, she said that that's something that couldn't be done. So I decided I was going to give up on that and go to school. My mom and my dad were upset about that. They had a stake conference where I believe it was Elder Fowler, who was in the First Quorum of the 70 at the time, came to that stake conference. They drugged me up to talk to him after the stake conference, and he asked what was going on, and I told him, I says, I was going to go on a mission. I broke my back. I can't get the medical release signed. I'm just going to give up and go to college. And I still remember the feelings of the spiritual feeling that Mormons talk about. He told me, he says, you don't go to school, the Lord will make it possible for you to go on a mission. And within a week, my medical papers were signed to go on a mission. Now, we had a bishop, he wasn't the bishop at the time, but he was in our ward who was a doctor. He took the papers and signed them. And I'm almost certain now, as I look back, that the asterisk at the bottom was this kid can only go somewhere where there's good medical care. He has to be somewhere where he has a normal house and he can't have a bike. And I was sent to Montana. The first area that I went into was in Great Falls. It was in the city. And the companion that I got was really excited because he had been a walking, biking area and we had a car. So
you had cars and stateside and
cars stateside. I had to go to a doctor in Montana every month and get X-rays and send them, and it worked out great. And I served a great mission and had a wonderful mission.
And that's just the church looking out for you and
right.
letting you serve, but serving in a way that would be medically healthy for you.
Which, looking back, I'm glad they did that because it worked well for me.
Of course, they frame it as divine intervention, but really it's just being respectful to your medical condition.
Correct, and it worked great. So, but on my mission, I had an experience about 6 months into my mission. And the experience that I had about 6 months into my mission was that I had not, when you get asked that question, is there anything that you have not taken care of with priesthood leaders that you should take care of? I had not taken care of some of those things that I had done early on because I didn't want the abuse to come out. And I confessed those to my mission president about 6 months in. And I told him I didn't confess the abuse, but I confessed that I had had problems as an early teenager with masturbation. I had never brought that up with anybody. And he was a great mission president. He ended up being an MTC mission president while I was at BYU when I came home. He's instrumental in me getting into BYU to begin with because I wasn't smart enough, but he did get me in. He looked at me and he says, did this happen like right before you came on your mission? I said, no, this was before I was age 15. And he's like, oh, well, not a problem. Don't worry about that. Just go out and go to work. So I did. But I left.
And you were confessing masturbation, basically.
Correct. Okay. That I hadn't confessed to anybody else prior. So I walked out of that zone conference knowing that I had confessed everything and was good.
And why didn't you feel safe by the time you're 19 or 20 or whatever to talk about the abuse?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know why. I just didn't want to talk about it.
But you knew about the abuse.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been
in fact,
a memory fresh in your mind, but you
and
didn't feel safe talking about it.
No, and that experience that I had when I confessed those things, I left that meeting with a understanding of the atonement that my uncle had been forgiven. Like I forgave him for the abuse that he subjected me to. And all of the burdens that had been on my shoulders growing up with that abuse, I felt those disappear. And it was no longer an issue for me. Like I didn't need to internalize it. I didn't think about it. The heaviness and the burdens of that were gone. And I always believed that was me feeling the power of the atonement, those burdens being lifted and disappearing. And from that point on in my life, I finished my mission. I came home. I was comfortable being at weddings or family reunions with my uncle. I held no grudge. It was not an issue. Even though I had those memories, it was not an issue. And I had no intentions ever of bringing that up because it wasn't not a problem for me.
Julie, anything you want to throw in here, kind of as he's kind of shared the narrative relating to, your marriage to him, your memories, anything you want to throw in, just kind of up to the timeline?
Yeah, no, I never would have imagined that Jared had suffered any kind of abuse. He and Lynn weren't, or he and his uncle were not close, but they could be at a family event. You would never have sensed tension. You would never have sensed anything was a problem. He didn't seek him out, but it wasn't an issue.
Sometimes victims of sexual abuse, it affects their sexual relations or sexuality in marriage. Was that a side of? Is there anything you want to share about that?
No, we talked to Natasha about that, and it's not affected us at all. That we know. Maybe we're not normal. I don't know. No.
That's a shout out to Natasha Helfer Parker.
Yes.
A huge shout out.
Who introduced this the Egleys to me. She's interviewed them on Mormon Mental Health Podcast.
Yes.
Is that right?
Correct.
And check out Mormon Mental Health Podcast. Natasha is a real pioneer in this
She's
work.
amazing.
And so thanks,
Super
Natasha.
amazing. Yeah.
Okay,
No.
so things were, it was a good marriage,
Things were
healthy
good.
marriage.
We were
and
good.
You didn't know there was a problem.
Yeah. Nope.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're thriving in your career. You become
Yeah.
a commercial airline
Yeah,
pilot.
we have-
That's a top-notch job.
Yeah. Very successful in my career endeavors, and we had great kids, and life just moved on very, very quickly until
So someone would say, leave it then.
right.
You're healthy, you're happy, you're in a good marriage, you're having a healthy sex life. You know your sexual identity by this point. You've forgiven your uncle. It's all, he's moved on, you've moved on. So obviously that's one thing that comes to mind. So how in the world could this come back up, and why? What happened?
Well, and that's what I had no intentions of ever bringing this up. And my uncle I don't remember the exact years, but he was called, I believe, first to be on a high council. And it didn't bother me that bad, but I scratched my head a little and thought, I'm pretty sure he's never confessed or taken care of what he did, because had he done so, I probably would have heard something from somebody. But I don't know.
You would hope.
I would hope, but I didn't know. So I just, in the back of my mind, I had questions about that, but it didn't bother me that bad. He got sick and actually got bladder cancer and struggled. He's a cancer survivor, and he overcame that, and then was called into a bishopric. And I don't know the exact timeline of this. He may have been in a bishopric before he was sick, and then they released him when he got sick. But when he got better from cancer 3 years ago in the summer of 2015, he was called to be a bishop. And I remember being at my parents' house, and they were all excited and says, "Oh, your Uncle Lynn's been called to be a bishop." All of my my grandfather had 4 sons. All 4 had now been called to be bishops at one point in time in their life. And that was a very proud moment in our Mormon family, was all of the sons of Grandpa have now been bishops. And that day to me was something in my mind clicked and said, no, how does that work? That can't work for me. I was not comfortable with that. And so I started to question stuff. Initially, I was...
But really quickly, I don't, a faithful Orthodox Mormon might immediately say, the atonement.
Correct.
Why didn't in your mind you just go, oh, I've forgiven him. I'm sure the Lord's forgiven him. The Lord in his wisdom, there's discernment with the calling of leaders. Clearly the Lord has forgiven him. It's taken care of, and his calling's inspired. What kept you from just sort of drawing that conclusion and moving on?
I don't know, because I tried to draw that conclusion. But in my mind, the conclusion was, the way I understand the atonement to work is that unless you confess and forsake and make your wrongs right.
And restitution,
And
which would have involved you.
which would have involved
at
me.
least an apology,
Correct.
right?
So he's been living his life. When somebody asks him the question, is there anything that you have done in your life you've not taken care of with priesthood leaders? I knew that clearly there was something that he had done that he had not taken care of with priesthood leaders.
Yeah.
And that bothered me. I thought, how can revelation work to call this man into that position when clearly he's probably not worthy to be called into that position? And that's the road that I went down. And so I actually started to get on the internet, get copies of handbooks on the internet to see what the handbook said about how the church deals with abuse, because I want to know, maybe it's okay, maybe he did go and confess it, and maybe he did take care of it. And as I start to study those things, I realize that had he confessed it, is most likely would not be called as a bishop, but he's called as a bishop. So in my mind, I had to reconcile, is he called by revelation? Did God call him into this position, or did God not call him into this position? And I came to the conclusion in my mind that most likely he didn't call him into this position. That was my thoughts.
And this is just something that I'll just jump in and say, we are raised to believe that callings are inspired of God as
Correct.
Mormons. But over the past several years, I've had many, many people come to me and tell me that, their uncle or their brother or their dad or their husband was in an affair when they were called into the bishopric or be bishop or in a stake presidency or even a stake president. Former sexual abusers, current and former abusers, current and former adulterers, current and former people engaging in business fraud. And I don't mean to attack Mormon doctrine or people's sacred beliefs, but this idea that every person who receives a calling, that it's inspired of God and is worthy, is a real. It's clearly not true, and two, it's very damaging, because what it does is it enables people to be put in positions of trust. And then in those positions of trust and power, it enables people like a Joseph Bishop to do something like sexually abuse a missionary in the MTC as a mission president. And so we have to find a way to get rid of this belief that all callings are inspired, or it allows very dangerous people to have even more power and access to abuse others. I'm sorry for that detour, but I just had to throw
exactly
that in.
what I would say. And in my mind, from a victim's perspective, I felt like I was, God's going to reward him and call him to be a bishop, and he's going to get this position, which is a position that some people in the church, covet. And as a victim, how does that make a victim feel? Like God doesn't care about things that happen to you as a victim. He's going to reward this perpetrator. And so I struggled with that for probably a year, trying to figure out what's going on here. How does this work? Is discernment real? I knew from early on as a kid in Bishop's interviews that some of these guys don't have discernment, because they clearly didn't discern that I was lying to them through a bishop's interview. And maybe there's no discernment in the way bishops are called. So I spent some time trying to figure out how this works. And in that process, I ran across a podcast that you had done with a sex crime investigator from Arizona, I believe. I never heard of Mormon Stories podcast, but when I was Googling how does the LDS Church deal with sex abuse, that came up. And I listened to that, and I'm like, because I thought that this was a very isolated, in my naive Mormon mind was, this is a very rare, isolated, this has got to be one of the only, this can't be a big problem. This is just an isolated incident.
That's the episode with Matt Long, by the way, for those who want to reference it.
Yeah, very, very good episode. There was another one that you did earlier with the woman, Barbara
Peterson, maybe?
Somebody. There was two of them that I found that I'd listened to. And those interviews, opened up my eyes to this happens more than just with me. And of course that led me to start to question, well, if this isn't what they say it is, maybe nothing else is either. And I very quickly went down the road that most people that are experiencing faith transitions go through. I knew a lot of those issues before, very, very mildly, but as I started to research what else may not be right, I very quickly went down that road of questioning my faith and questioning whether the church was what it claimed to be, and my life was a mess.
And what year was this?
This would have been summer of 2015 to summer of 2016.
So 2 to 3 years ago, you're going through a full-blown faith crisis.
Yeah, by myself. I'm at work, Googling and listening to podcasts and trying to read stuff and ordering books, and she doesn't know that I'm doing any of this.
What made you scared to tell her?
Honestly, I don't know, because I knew that she would probably, I wasn't the type that thought that she would leave me.
Why not?
I don't know. I just trusted that she would not. But I didn't want to tell anybody. Like, my dad was our bishop for part of that time. I didn't want anybody to know that I didn't believe. But I didn't believe, and that was the issue. And I didn't want to be around anybody. Like, I would bid to work on Sunday so I didn't have to go to church, and I would avoid family stuff. If I could be alone, I didn't want to be around anybody. My wife, my kids, my family included. It was miserable. And she knew something was going on. She didn't know what. And at that same time, I had a side business in North Dakota, and I had a court case. I had to go up to Bismarck. I had to drive to Bismarck to a court hearing for this business that I had been running. And it was a 12-hour drive up, 1 hour appearance in court, drive back. And I just told her, I got to drive up. I'm going to drive up. I'm going to drive back. I'm going to make a quick trip out of it. And she's like, I'm going with you. And I'm like, no, you're not. I'm driving by myself. I need 24 hours, of alone time. I don't want. And I told her she couldn't come. And we got in probably almost one of the first fights we've ever been in our marriage. And she dug her heels in and said, I'm going. And I said, I'm leaving without you. And I woke up early. I was going to leave without her, and she was ready.
I got up early.
She got
packed
up.
my stuff.
So, Julie, tell us what's happening
version.
as an observer as he's going through this. What was it like for you?
So we moved up to the family farm, and I remember sitting in early society lesson, and it was on trials. And I remember thinking in my head, everyone's like, everyone has trials. They're all different. And I'm like, I don't. This is crazy, and this is prideful, whatever. But I had no trials. We were happy. We had a great marriage. We have 4 amazing kids. We're financially successful. We're where we had planned to be. I'm like, maybe, so I convinced myself that's my trial, is to not have trials and not be prideful. So we start building a house. We get this side business. I start on some trials, I guess. But I noticed that Jared starts withdrawing. I think it's the stress of this business. He's farming more. Between his airline job and his farming job in the summer.
3 full-time jobs for a couple of years.
He
It was a mess.
would work 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, because he always took Sunday off. His stress load's through the roof. I assume he's, over the top with this business, the house, the farm. I'm trying to get it back to the way it used to be when we had no trials.
And I used that stuff as an excuse. When it would come up, it was, I'm just busy, I don't have days off, and I used that as an excuse to cover up what I was really going through.
Overworking is a form of self-medication.
Yeah.
And I definitely did that.
Yeah.
So he did that.
An avoidance of dealing with issues.
Yeah. He was withdrawing from, he would usually always engage more with the kids and with me, and he just kind of wanted to be by himself. And so he's got this car ride coming up, and I know something's up, and I was going. And like he said, it's crazy, but we never fought. I guess he just put up with my crazy ways and would let me get away with stuff, but we never fought. And that's the closest to I'm going, no, you're not.
And what were you
Yes, I
thinking
am.
and feeling?
I didn't know. I just felt like something is going on, and I don't know what. And I really just thought he was stressed with the business, stressed with the house, stressed with the farm.
But why go? Why did you want to go? What?
Because I didn't want him to go by himself. I just was going to force myself,
What were you
force
scared
him
of?
to
What were you
spend
scared
time
of?
with me.
What were you worried?
I don't know that I was worried about anything, but I just felt like if I could get him alone and cornered, maybe I could alleviate some of the stress, maybe, because he used to talk to me all the time. We'd talk about things, and he hadn't been talking to me. And
I'm withdrawn.
I'm the talky, touchy-feely one, and he's the I need my bubble one. And so I just knew I'm going because something is going on.
Okay, good for you. I like that image of you just, I'm going.
She
I did.
And I was mad.
I had my stuff packed. I think I got up at like 5 and got ready just in case. And he wakes up, and I'm in the car.
Literally, yeah, literally. And I was mad. And so
You were mad.
I was mad
Why?
because I didn't want to go. I wanted to spend, 12 hours in a car with nobody there to I just want to be alone. And so we drove until we were past Bozeman. So we drove for 4 hours, and honestly,
Silence.
there was not a word said. Like, not a word said. And I remember being on the road between Bozeman and Billings thinking something's got to change. Like, I can't do this any longer. And so I told her, I says, I've got something to tell you. And she's like, I don't know what she was thinking. She's like, okay, you can tell. I remember her saying, you can tell me anything, whatever it is, I will stay with you. And I in my mind thought that she might be thinking that I was having an affair with somebody or was cheating on her or was going to want a divorce.
What'd you think?
I don't remember thinking those things. I just knew something was not right.
Yeah.
What made you say you can tell me anything? I will leave you.
Maybe that's my flaw. Maybe I would choose Jared over the church no matter what. But I would.
So that was your biggest fear that he
I
might...
mean, no, I don't think it was. I didn't even really think the church had anything to do with it. I just knew that Jared was the most important thing in my life. And no matter what or who or even an affair, I knew that I would try and work through it. Because he was the most important.
And I knew that she had no idea. I mean, I knew that if I were to ask her to list a dozen things of what she thought was going on, that she would never guess in a million years what they were.
Well, and he actually said to me, how good of a counselor are you? And I was like, what do you mean? I took some psychology classes. Like, where is this going?
Mm-hmm.
But I told her it was the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life was to tell my wife that I had been abused as a child and that she was the first one that I had ever told and that I didn't know what to do and that I didn't believe in the church anymore. And, I just unloaded the whole mess on her for the next hour and a half or whatever in the car. And I didn't know, I didn't know what to do. And that's why I had to tell her. I'm like, I can't keep doing this, but I don't know what to do. And so she right off the bat says, well, we've got to tell somebody. Somebody needs to know that this happened. And I said, no, I can't. And that was, I believe, in September of 2016, I think, somewhere around there. And I wasn't comfortable telling, I didn't want to talk to my parents about it. I didn't want to talk to any priesthood leaders about it. I says, we need to just take our time and figure this out because this is something that we need to make sure is handled so that everybody's lives can be as easy as possible because it's a mess. And I knew it was a mess. I knew it was going to be a huge mess. And I knew eventually we would have to tell somebody, but I wasn't ready then. And so at that point, it was great because I said, look, you've got to listen to these podcasts about how the church is dealing with sex abuse. And so I sent her those. And then I'm like, well, you've got to listen to these podcasts about this and about that. And so we were very quickly, I don't know if she was, honestly at that point had pretty much determined in my life that I didn't believe that the church was what it claimed to be, but I figured that was still a good place to be. So we kind of went through that faith transition over the next year, kind of together, trying to sort things out. She was called to be the primary president, I think, right before we left on that trip. And I was sitting there with the bishopric member came to call her to be the primary president, and I'm sitting there in the back of my mind screaming, no, don't say yes. But I knew she was going to say yes, and so she said yes, and I'm like, great. now I don't believe, and my wife's the primary president. But we went through the next year kind of going down that faith crisis road, but knew that the bigger issue was, what do we do about my uncle who's a bishop who shouldn't be a bishop? And I knew we had to tell somebody about it. And I drug my feet as long as I could because I didn't want to tell anybody about it because it was difficult, and I knew that it was going to make our lives probably more difficult to bring that up. So we decided to tell our bishop in December of 2017.
Let me pause before you do
Sure.
that, okay? I'm going to just read a few comments from our listeners. We have a very large audience joining us, a couple hundred plus people joining us live. So we want to thank you guys for joining us. I'll just read a couple comments.
Sure.
And then I'm going to ask the audience one thing before we continue. This is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Somebody just posted this is a real tear jerker, and it is. So Ivana writes, I just realized that it's not just the LDS Church admin covering up abuse. It's people in the church like my parents who never reported abuse from neighbors. Why? To not make waves. So she's basically saying one of the things that enables silence is just this fear of making waves, not wanting to hurt people,
Sure.
not wanting to hurt the church, not wanting to hurt the church's reputation, not wanting to cause problems. Thank you, Ivana. Jake writes, it can be so nerve-wracking to share these things in private, let alone live on Facebook in front of hundreds of people. I'm grateful for the courage you both are showing right now. And on behalf of my family, we support you 100%. So that's
Thanks.
a little support from Jake. Thanks, Jake. Curtis writes, that is exactly what happened to me in reference to the abuse. So you're not alone. Already people are coming out saying something similar has happened to them. Thanks, Curtis, for being vulnerable. Victoria writes, I understand you. I was also abused as a child, and these memories never change. We keep these secrets for so long, but eventually when we do speak out as an adult, it helps release a lot of the damaging issue that we carry with us. So she's saying it was very much a release for her to get this out and not keep it
Sure.
packed down. And we'll talk about whether that was your experience as well. But thanks, Victoria. Lisa writes, you have to wonder how it is that these men are able to move forward in life when the victims hold on to the things that happen to them through life. So when we think about, your uncle, how did he just move on? How did he, what did he do intellectually, psychologically,
Right.
emotionally to just pretend that this never happened? Or did he handle it in other ways? We don't know. We would love to interview him if he ends up watching this. And if, with your permission, that's an option that we have if there are other abusers that want to come on Mormon Stories and talk about
How they do it.
abuse from the point of an abuser. That would be a very sacred experience, but we would welcome abusers to come on and tell their side of the story if they're willing. Probably few will want to take us up on that. Lisa writes, Daniel writes, the vulnerability here is amazing and heartbreaking and beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story with us. So thanks, Daniel. Daniel's a great supporter. I just want to ask listeners a favor. Right now, we have a couple hundred people who are tuning in live. We are about to talk about the main thrust of this interview, which isn't to embarrass your uncle. It isn't to out him or shame him, although that's an inevitable product.
Unfortunately.
But the purpose of this interview is to highlight how the church handles victims of abuse bureaucratically, administratively. And so I want to ask every listener who's willing right now to please go to this video stream and share it on your walls if you're comfortable. And just say, I'm listening right now to an interview of a victim of sexual abuse whose perpetrator ended up as bishop. And the focus will be how the church handles abuse. And even if you are skeptical, the point is that someone is reporting abuse, right. Someone else is a bishop. And it's an important thing to discuss how people who allege abuse are treated,
right.
And how alleged perpetrators are handled. And it's going to involve a general authority. It involves a current bishop, and it involves people's lives. And this is during right smack dab in the middle of the Kavanaugh hearings with the U.S. Supreme Court and the Me Too movement after Harvey Weinstein. And, you know, the United States and even the world is having this reckoning of how do we handle victims of abuse, reporters, even years or decades after the abuse happened, how do we handle it? And it's not just Brett Kavanaugh, it's not just Dr. Ford, it's not just the U.S. Supreme Court, it's Mormonism, it's Catholicism, it's Scientology, it's Jehovah's Witness, it's schools, it's whatever. And we all have to get comfortable talking about these issues and handling them in a better way. So I invite all of you listeners who are willing and who are vulnerable and who are in a position of privilege, willing to be vulnerable and who are in a position of privilege, to please right now, or if you're listening after this has been live, if you're willing to share this interview on your walls and say, help team with us to learn about and talk about how to handle abuse, we can reach a lot more people that way, because breaking the code of silence is part of how we improve and get better. So please share this right now on your walls if you're willing. Let's see the live active listeners increase to 300 or 400 if we can. Share it afterwards as well, and let's see if we can make a positive difference and help the Mormon Church and all of us in all of our organizational stewardships learn to discuss openly these issues and to handle them better. Is that all right?
That's great.